Welcome to the Gender in Focus podcast. I'm Elle, and each week I get to ask Kai Scott, the president of Transfocus Consulting, all the questions you have ever wanted to ask about trans and non-binary people in the workplace and in the wider world.
I always talk about like the who to what translation. So rather than men and women, what is it that you're describing about them? What's written is official. And so that's what people are going to lean on. And if it's properly set up, everyone's going to be great. If it's not, they're going to miss the mark. Today, we're diving into something most people barely notice, but affects everyone: gendered language at work. From default references to men, to using he, she, as if that covers all genders, to documents that only acknowledge men and women, these patterns are everywhere. We'll also talk about how terms like female and woman get used interchangeably when they really shouldn't, and how public documentation still clings to the outdated titles Mr., Ms., Mrs., and so forth. But here's the thing. This isn't just about making language better for trans and non-binary people. Gender-inclusive language actually benefits cisgender people too. We'll clear up some common misconceptions, explore the assumptions baked into workplace communications, and offer easy ways to make your language more inclusive without overhauling everything you write or say. I'm joined here by my colleague, Elle, who will be a part of the journey of unpacking gender-inclusive language. How are you doing, Elle?
I'm doing very well, thank you, Kai. How are you doing?
Excellent, excellent. I'm really excited about this topic. And like I said, it's everywhere, so might as well shine a light.
This actually comes up quite a lot in the workplace, and you work with organizations quite a lot over this, right? Where do you think that gendered language most frequently appears?
Yes. So we review all kinds of different documents, whether it's a website or internal documents, even externally facing documents, contracts, not from a legal lens, but just how language is represented in it, brochures and PowerPoints and reports, and you name it, we've looked at it. Policies. Policies is a really common place that people tend to start, because this is something that is aspirational. So if is it inclusive of everyone, kind of missing the point of a policy. So it makes sense why organizations want to start there. And basically just taking a very close look at it from a gendered lens. So it's not just gender diversity, but just gender in general. So where are there references to gender in that document? And sometimes they might be invisible to some people because they're reading it from another lens, right? Does this make sense for, whatever thing you're trying to implement? So it's understandable why people miss it. But because we have such a laser focus on gender, we're able to see things that perhaps others have overlooked.
What would you say is the most common use of gendered language in things like, especially policies? If you say that, that's where most people begin. What do you see in those?
Yeah, so there's a whole host of different things. The biggest one that comes up quite frequently, and we have these kind of master inventories that we take, and for each document we have a line item, and then we specify what the issues that we see. And so we've done some math on it. It's not just a vibe check. It's more based in something. Although I'm sure people could also, based on vibes, figure it out. From a data perspective, we have seen the most common one that kind of is on repeat is the use of he and she when you're kind of trying to reference a general audience or a topic. He, she, maybe you're describing a role that will do something. And so the chief medical officer, he, she will be responsible for X, Y, and Z.
Right.
In
interesting.
her, his domain, right? Or whatever. Because people are reading it from one perspective, they can literally not see that. Or some people don't know what the issue is with that. And I'll explain briefly is that he and she doesn't represent all genders, right? So it does unintentionally exclude people who are non-binary because they don't use he or she. So that's where doesn't quite encompass everyone. The intention is for that to be the case, but it's not.
Mm-hmm.
I would also add that it's a bit cumbersome too. Like it doesn't roll off the tongue to say he, she, Um,
Yes.
so, or even to read it, it's like he, she, you kind of feel like it's a bump in the road. I do think it's important to kind of be like, this is how we want to do things.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly this one is a really good example where it's super easy to pretty much find them and then replace them. So
Mm-hmm.
uh, this is a good one because we want to represent everyone in the types of things that we say, because you don't want a chief medical officer who uses they them pronouns to come along and be like, what's going on here?
Right. Yeah.
Of course, they would understand what's happening and know that it applies to them, but still, like you don't want to have just delays in people, or to be able to see themselves in what's written. So that's where he, she references are kind of littered throughout and can be easily replaced with the singular use of they, them, as a like stand in for anyone. And in
Mm-hmm.
fact, there's some research that suggests that using they instead of he or she pronouns and or she pronouns, that it actually reduces the amount of bias. People have
Really?
images when we think about he pronouns, we have an image in our mind. Or
Mm.
if we think about a she pronoun, we have an image. And when they is used, actually people don't conjure up an image, or it's maybe a bit more of a open image of somebody, and then anybody can step into that and we're not
Mm-hmm.
surprised, right? Because sometimes
Right.
people show up and we didn't expect them to,
Mm-hmm.
and we can wear that surprise on our face even, um, versus if it's a expansive they, it can really be helpful so that we're not skipping a beat,
Mm-hmm.
when we're meeting somebody for the first time. I
That's
will
interesting.
say the evolution of he, she, it comes from somewhere, in that it used to be just the default he to
Mm-hmm.
represent everybody.
Right.
Back in the day, even sometimes some documents, I still find he as a default
Really?
for everybody. I'm like, whoa, we're going back in the vault here.
Yeah.
um, and so, especially male dominated
Mm.
industries can have that, it can be pretty prevalent. So just as simple, that's why it was he, and then people were like, okay, we can't have that. There's women too. Like, yes,
Right.
let's add women into the mix and add she. But unfortunately, we haven't quite gone far enough to be
Mm-hmm.
inclusive of everyone.
So where you've got he and she,
Mhm.
there's also, I remember you telling me about using men and women in written things, or there's other stuff that you've talked about where it's like gendered and it's kind of the same thing, but there are so many easy fixes to it. The change from he, she to they is a pretty simple one. And then there's men and women, but you could just say all or everybody,
People.
uh, people. Yeah. What do you think is causing people this confusion or this kind of I don't know if it's is it reluctance or to change or confusion or what is it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are folks that probably haven't given it a lot of thought. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
it is just not being aware of why this is not exactly, for many people it's like, this covers everybody, what are you talking about?
Right.
It's like
Mm-hmm.
men and women, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And in a world where people have largely just thought of there being only two genders,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe they've been introduced to non-binary people, but maybe they forget, right? Because it's such an ingrained thing of like there's only two genders. It
Mm-hmm.
takes some time for people to realize, oh yeah, actually men and women, that's not all the genders, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're missing some people. So if
Right.
we think that that term will capture everyone, there some people will read that and not read themselves into that statement, or
Mm-hmm.
and so it's just like super simple, right? Where shifts in language can be truly inclusive of everyone, even if the intention was that men and women be that. It
Mm-hmm.
just realizing it's not, and we can do better, and it's not even that big of a change, right? I mean, it depends
Mm-hmm.
on the context of what's written.
For sure.
Sometimes you could talk about people. I always talk about like the who to what translation So rather than men and women, what is it that you're describing about them, right?
Mhm.
People who have colon cancer, like I don't know
Right.
what the context of the written communications are,
Mhm.
but that can be read into it, and then or just simply people. Like maybe it was
Mhm.
just wanting to talk about folks, or employees or customers, right? Just there's terms that are truly all encompassing of everyone, and sometimes you just don't need to have gender in the mix, and
Mhm.
so just dialing some of that down. This doesn't mean they have to remove it entirely. There are moments where it makes sense to reference, and definitely, if it makes sense, continue to do so in an expansive way. But sometimes not, and that's where those shifts can really help, so that people aren't running over a speed bump. Because it's just like it's not that it's like it does for many hurt, right? It's like, ugh,
Mhm.
again, I'm not here in the mix. Um, but for many, it's just like a speed bump. And if you have lots of speed bumps over the day, it just like it adds up, right? And
Mhm.
so, because like one time, I was at the airport in Toronto, and I had a delay for 3 hours.
Mm.
So I gave myself a little project because
Oh my gosh.
I'm a nerd that way. And I counted the number of ladies and gentlemen for the announcements. It's
Mhm.
another very common example. Now, that's not usually in writing, it's more spoken, but has some parallels here with man woman
Mhm.
references. And I think I counted 300. Like, it was a lot of references
Oh
to,
my goodness.
yeah, yeah, ladies and gentlemen, the flight, blah, blah, blah. Every time like, there was an announcement, it was ladies
Oh
and
my
gentlemen.
gosh.
Yeah. So
That's so interesting and
I was like,
wild.
that sucks.
Yeah, that does.
And, I wrote to the airport and said, hey, you might think about another version, or, you know, there's so many different ways of approaching that. Like, you can still continue with ladies and gentlemen, but I've been
Mhm.
adding gentle them to the end,
Oh my gosh, that's
so,
cute.
or just hello, esteemed guests, or, flyers. There's friendly ways
Travelers.
to do
Yeah.
travelers. Exactly. Yeah.
Um, did they get back to you? Did they respond to you?
I don't think so. Not that I recall. I mean, I send out so many things. I'm a very much a see something, say something person.
What a nerd.
Right. I don't keep track of who responds, and sometimes they take their own pathway.
I want to go back to something you said a second ago or a bit ago, which was about how using he and she creates these sort of biases.
Mm,
And I want to go back to that because it's really
mm,
interesting.
mm,
What assumptions are made in when you have written documentation and there's like a lot of gendered language in there?
mm,
That would tell me then that there are a lot of assumptions going on. Can you speak a bit more about that?
mhm.
That's such a clumsy question, but I'm really interested in that.
Oh yeah, no, and I'm glad you're circling back, because there's so much more to that research.
Mm,
One aspect, before I go into what the mechanics of it is,
mm,
that when you use he, she, people reading it, if they have a binary gender, they will see themselves, right? So if
ooh,
they use she pronouns, they'll see a woman, and if they use he pronouns, they'll see a man, like a stereotypical man, right?
mhm,
And so then, if you think about how you approach people, maybe it's a job description, right?
mm,
And he has he, she littered throughout, and people then, as part of hiring, will kind of imagine that person coming in as
right.
themselves. So if it's he, she language, obviously, if it's default he, everybody sees
Mhm,
he, like a traditional man. And so that really influences how your mental landscape is set up to meet somebody that you've
mm,
not met before, you know
yeah,
and baking in all kinds of assumptions into that, gendered expectations of roles, like how maybe they will be the same gender,
mm,
but then you expect that person to act in a particular way. If it's a woman, more nurturing and calm and compliant, or whatever the
yeah,
stereotypes are. um, and if they're not, then there's a problem. And then we
Mm.
can get into the kind of the pathways of like, oh, maybe they're not a good fit, right?
Right.
When if we have a more expansive, like not a pre-prescribed view of who that person is going to be, that allows people to show up as they truly are and understand their skill sets and be a little bit more oriented towards what actually matters. Can you do the
Hmm.
job, right?
Right.
So that's kind of the mechanics of what it does. Is like, are you imagining yourself, and then if that person isn't like you, you're kind of annoyed or upset or distraught.
Sure.
Or can this person just show up, no matter who they are?
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
I'm so interested in that.
Well, it goes even deeper. I don't know how far down the rabbit hole you want to go here.
Oh, please.
There's another study looking at different types of languages, and the experiment is somebody speaks a particular, their original language. They'll meet somebody and then they'll ask that person to describe the person afterwards, right? And if it's a very gendered language, top 5 will always involve this was a man, this was a woman, something about their gender, assumed
Mm.
gender. If it's a less gendered language, Persian, Mandarin, I think there's a few kind of gender neutral or less gendered languages.
Hmm.
Then what somebody's gender is 20th. Like it's way down the line. They'll describe all
Really?
kinds of other things, their hair, their clothing, what they were saying, or, personality. Gender is 20th. So how much we, have gender built into our language or referencing
Mm.
continuously reinforces how we see people and what we categorize them. And yeah, and it's just not as present for folks in more gender neutral languages.
That's so interesting. Ooh, thanks for telling me.
Oh, yeah. So we think that we're the kind of purveyors of our perception, but
Mm.
actually, language is a huge part of shaping it. So what we say or what we write makes a huge difference for what kind of community, culture,
Mm.
space we're trying to create. And that's why, I mean, we already know that words have a lot of power, but in
Hmm.
this vein, they do as well.
That's so interesting. In some of the work that I've seen you do, we'll find that some documents will have a kind of mix of both sex and gender, almost as if they mean the same thing. So we'll
Right.
see sometimes a reference to female, and then later down the line, it will be a reference to a woman.
Mhm.
And do you see that a lot in the work that you do?
Oh, yeah. Big time. And this is I think for most people, they don't notice it
Right.
because for many cisgender readers, they are interchangeable, right?
Hmm.
People can use female and woman. It all applies to certain people. Cool. However, for transgender people, there is a difference between gender identity. Usually, the terms man and woman, non binary, those are gender specific terms, and their sex, which are female, male, intersex. Those are
Hmm.
sex based terms. And so uh, it's usually something people can kind of navigate. They're like, okay, I kind of see that's mostly probably from a cisgender perspective that it's written and it applies to me, or it doesn't. People have to, but I think it does get confusing, especially in say medical communications or anything
Hmm.
where there's like a specific aspect of man or woman that they're trying to get at and maybe is not quite apparent because it
Hmm.
hasn't been spelled out. And so toggling between them is like, okay, which one is it and what's going on?
Hmm.
And that can actually present a barrier to understanding or access or taking next steps. So it is helpful to be more specific rather than just man or woman or both or a female woman using that interchangeable. It's actually specifying, we're talking about women and people who get pregnant and
Right.
XYZ, right? Whatever the messaging. Now, not every workplace is handling this specifically, unless, for example, it's related to benefits, especially leave. that's a whole nother kettle of fish, so we won't go into that in a lot of detail, because it's not just about changing the language. It's also about aligning systems and all of that. But that's where it can get a bit tricky and confusing for a lot of trans and non-binary folks. I appreciate why some people are using it. From a grammar perspective, female is an adjective, so it's describing something and is much more easy to use in language, versus woman is a noun. And so it just doesn't work exactly, doesn't flow as much. And so that's why female is used a lot. I will also mention that from a practical standpoint, female covers all ages too. So there's that dimension to it. So it includes girls and women or young women, right? So it doesn't quite give the spectrum if you're just, or you having to reference girls and women if that's applicable, right? Depending on the spread of the ages. So I understand why there is a certain momentum towards using female in some respects, but it again, that confusion can arise and can present problems for trans and non-binary folks. So it is a matter of being a bit more creative or more specific.
With all of this, we've been looking at it from the perspective of how this benefits trans people and how we can make sure that trans and non-binary people are included. But there are benefits to cis people too. You alluded to at the beginning. So could you go into that? Because I think maybe people wouldn't have even recognized that or realized.
Right. Yeah, it's true. Oftentimes, you're right that as our company name suggests, we are focused on trans people, but certainly not exclusive. We do want things to be good for cisgender people, especially for changing something. It's got to work for them as well. Obviously, well, got to work for everybody. However, what we find is that when we shift language, it actually helps, especially if in this instance we were just talking about female, woman, and lack of specificity. Once you start introducing that specificity, that also helps people understand if it applies to them, even as cisgender people. In the pregnancy example, might not apply to them, right? If you think about two women together, whether they're lesbian or bisexual or whatnot, pansexual, they one will be the birth parent and one will be the non-birth parent, and so that specificity is actually helpful even if both are cisgender. So that, I think, just extra little bit of legwork can help everybody understand whether something applies to them or not. And so that helps cisgender people. Also, I think there's something to be said about just in it, not every instance we need to reference gender, so we can take a little holiday from so much gender. and, and I think there's a bit of relief for cisgender people because, of course, I think to some degree or another, we all have that pressure of gender on us, and whether we're cis or we're trans or otherwise. And so, can we just take some of the gender out of it, especially if it doesn't apply? Obviously, stay if it needs to, but for the stuff where it's just not necessary, just let's have a holiday. Let's,
Yeah.
be people, be travelers, and I think that is helpful, like just not as much a cognitive load for folks who are also cisgender. And some of it we talked about in the research too, right? Just that openness to people, being able to receive people who you meet for the first time for who they are, rather than having already applied something on them that then you have to remove and reapply something else if it doesn't fit.
Especially what you were saying about hiring, or that's really wild that can have such a massive impact.
Oh, yeah.
It makes sense. I mean, we like subconsciously take in that messaging all the time, but it's just really interesting, and that can definitely benefit, especially in like male dominated or places that really have that heavy gendered expectation. That's really interesting, and I think that could really benefit everybody. And also what you just said about things like, did you say birthing parent?
People who are pregnant.
People who are pregnant, right? I have one of my best friends has a wife who gave birth, and I think what often happens is when you don't have that guidance or you don't have that practice around non-gendered language, is that you can start filling in your own gaps.
Mm.
And so what happened with them was that you had who's the real mum, and of course they're both the real mum.
Oh, geez, people.
Yeah, yeah.
Yikes.
Yeah, which really sucks. And luckily for them, that they were, they took it on the chin, and they handled it as well as they could. But this guidance, or having that kind of in practice and explicitly laid out, it really benefits everybody.
Mhm.
So you don't fall into that situation where they are both cis, but were.
Totally. And especially having written down
Mhm,
helps to give people the language to describe that and
mhm,
to talk to people. And it sets the standard too, to say in our organization, this is how we talk about it, right?
mhm.
And it sets staff up for success because
Absolutely.
most staff, they want to do the right thing.
Mhm,
They're like, just tell me what to say. I'm on it. Let's go. But if you have everywhere mother only,
mhm,
then that's what they're going to replicate, because
mhm,
that's what's written. What's written is official. And so
mhm,
that's what people are going to lean on. And if it's properly set up, everyone's going to be great. If it's not,
mhm.
they're going to miss the mark.
For sure, yeah. What would you say are some like common misunderstandings regarding inclusive writing and like communications?
Common misconceptions, it's going to take a long time. It's going to be
Mm.
controversial. It's not necessary. There's a common misconception is there's too few trans people to make so much of an effort. Right? So
Right.
those almost a bit tied together, right? It's going to take a lot of
Mm.
effort, and there's too few to even warrant this type of change.
Mhm.
Of course, it doesn't just apply to inclusive writing, but it's pretty present for that. When in fact, a lot of the changes, if you make them and didn't talk about them, people would probably not notice them, right?
Mhm.
And they can be done fairly quickly. Now, certain ones you want to be a bit more careful. Like I mentioned, the benefits. It's not just about changing the words. Like you have to think about the systems that support that and make sure they're up to date. There's third parties, et cetera, et cetera. So I do advocate for thoughtful process, but it's actually not as cumbersome as one thinks. It really is helpful to take an inventory, to know where you're at, what the problem areas are,
Mhm.
how prevalent the problems are too, because sometimes people think, oh, it's just here and there, and then we like give them, this
Right.
happens more than 26 times. 36% of your documents, people are like, oh, okay,
Wow.
this is a thing, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's deeply woven into how we talk. And then to undertake, a change process, basically track changes in a Word document. But, there's this thoughtful process that can be undertaken that doesn't need to take a long time. And is not generally super controversial because it's really about expanding the circle
Mhm.
rather than changing things or excluding people or anything like that. So um, I think it's okay and important to discuss it, especially with internal stakeholders, so that they understand what's happening. People generally just need to know why.
Mhm.
And because some people just miss that there's, non-binary folks who are excluded, or by describing men and women in a very narrow way, it excludes trans men and women. And so just a bit of help on that front can really set people up for success. And it doesn't really cost much. I mean, some time, but not material cost, right? I mean, certainly if there's like banners or things where you've printed things that might need to be updated, but you can take a gradual approach, right? To say, let's change the easy stuff first, and then build a bridge to changing things that cost money, if they do at all. So
Right.
those are some of the common misconceptions and the kind of the more realistic look at things.
Mm. I should have asked this earlier, but I forgot. And
Mm.
so there is no easy move into it.
Right.
But I was thinking about how you do a lot of public speaking,
Mm.
and that's kind of a big part of, or a big element of your job. And you've mentioned before about documentation and uh, how speakers are listed and sort of
Uh,
presented. Could you talk about that as well? Sorry that there's no swift move into that.
Oh, no worries. I mean, this is a really interesting one that especially happens in a lot of municipalities or government in general, where there's public hearings and people are documented as having spoken on a particular topic, for or against, or, whatever they're bringing. And this is a really important part of democracy, that not only people come and speak their voice or their experience to a particular issue, but that it's recorded and documented by the government, and then they action, hopefully, that that input, right? So this kind of consultative process is key. However, there are some ways of recording that can be inclusive, or ones that are less than ideal, especially for trans folks. And we want to encourage trans people to be a part of public discourse. So by making these adjustments, especially I would say municipalities where there's a lot of discussion and a lot of participation, probably less so provincially or even federally. But still important to think about how that's recorded. An example of that is often recorders who are part of a public meeting will look at somebody and be like, okay, it's based on somebody's appearance, masculine, feminine, or otherwise. They'll be like, okay, that's a Mr. Scott, right? I look masculine, so I'm going to use the title Mr. Scott. And it's a way of a deference, right? A respectfulness. So I get why titles are used, but unfortunately, so many assumptions are made, and some of them are correct. But for especially trans and non-binary folks, there are a lot of mistakes, and so people get misgendered in the official record speaking on a topic. It's just not a great thing. It's really awful experience for many folks, and we discourage them from future discussions. So we don't want to use titles which have gender baked into them. Also, not great for cisgender women. Not a big fan, right? Because now we're going to also make assumptions based on somebody's age. If it's Mrs. or Ms., like, ugh, no, 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 no.
Yes.
And there's so many stories, not just of trans and non-binary folks that just not enjoying this at all. And even if you did collect, like, it's best to hear directly from the person what titles they use, making sure there's an expanded list that includes MX, which is a gender neutral title. Even that, people mess up because they refer to somebody, right? And again, are using assumptions because they're in the moment, make a quick snap judgment. So ideally, you just shift to a gender neutral approach or a gender inclusive approach, which is Speaker Scott.
Right.
This just solves a problem on many different fronts, and we're not having to guess, because that's stressful. Like, that's not fun to have to guess. And we get it right 100% of the time.
Right.
Done. Right. So that's a really easy solution, and then you don't have to collect it and remember it, and you just speaker or author if somebody submitted comments. So yeah.
It's quite a sort of risky business to be doing that based on how someone looks as well, though, in general.
Beads of sweat coming down.
But there are so many examples of people being, like, cis people being misgendered all the time if they don't fit what we would expect. So to base somebody's title purely on how they look is problematic, really, for everyone. Nobody wins in that case.
Yeah. What's even further than the Mr., Ms., Mrs. is goes into roles within the municipality, including my favorite, His Worship, the mayor, which is back to the default man assumption that mayors are going to be primarily or only men. And then are you going to have to switch it around to her worship, their worship? Like, maybe their worship would be fun, actually. How about we could just say, something, we could still be in deference to that,
Do we have
honorable.
to,
I think worship is a little far.
It's a bit much, don't you think?
That's a bit royal-esque. Maybe honorable, Scott,
Sure.
Honorable Scott. That has a good ring to it.
Do you want us to stop calling you that?
Oh my gosh, no. That would be plus uncomfortable. But that's funny.
Wow. I want to link in the show notes the inclusive communications
Mm.
resource. Could you explain that before we go?
Yes, I would be glad to do so. It's a really good resource. We spent a lot of time trying to assemble all the things we've ever heard across so many different, healthcare, government, corporate settings where we've heard different examples or seen them in the documents reviewed. We kind of put together a best practices style guide to help you. So you don't have to figure it all out because it's a lot to think about. And basically, it goes through all the things what not to do and examples of it, and then suggests alternatives to that, either
Mhm.
one or more alternatives. So you have options, and then also explain why, because oftentimes the why is really missing in this and helps to shift and help pivot away from certain things. And again, you don't have to do it all at once. You can just take steps to address, especially looking at the more prevalent instances. And also, feel free to reach out to us if you want to kind of go through more of a thoughtful process with an inventory of your documents, and we can review them together with you and then talk through some of the solutions and kind of tailor them to you. But if you just want to run with the resource we have and figure it out yourself, by all means, we really welcome people to take this important journey on inclusive writing and communications.
Where can we find you on social media, Kai? I realize I haven't asked you that for like about 6 episodes.
Oh,
So
nice.
maybe
I've
it's
been
time to.
spared. No, it's all good. It's okay. I'll gladly list the socials. Yeah, there's LinkedIn, there's Facebook, there's TikTok, where I will not dance. No, no, no. I mean,
One
we'll
day I would
see.
love to do
We'll
that.
see. Gender inclusive dance. We'll see. Uh, TikTok. What else do we have? Oh, Instagram. Basically, pretty much anywhere.
Mhm.
Threads and Blue Sky. So join
Mhm.
us on one or more of those and get these helpful tips. We post weekly, quite extensively, so you can continue your inclusion journey.
Thank you so much, Kai. And I guess we'll see you next week.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Bye for now.